Good to see everybody here today. I hope you'll open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. We are wrapping up a lengthy series on the book of Ecclesiastes, which for me, it has been especially helpful. And I think from listening to you, it's helped you as well. We are grateful for Solomon's wise words that he penned down through inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And we come to chapter 12 today to bring this to a close. You will recall that this is a sermon, and so Solomon is concluding the sermon, and he's going to continue to say some things that I think are especially pertinent to young people. And we'll talk about that momentarily. From the beginning of the book until now, Solomon has shown us something that is very consistent with the way we live today. In fact, I would say if Solomon were to rise from the dead and come back and land in our society, he would look around and say, yep, still got fools in power. Still got wise people that aren't where they should be. Still have bad things happening to good people. Good things happening to bad people. People are rich that shouldn't be rich, and people are broke that shouldn't be broke, and there's injustice everywhere. He would say, yeah, that's exactly the way it was when I was here. Although he may wonder why people spend $7 at Starbucks. That would be a little bit different. And I'm sure that would go under the foolish category instead of the wise category. But he never tasted one, so he doesn't really know. But he's shown us that mankind's the same, right? We're the same. And we're always going to be the same. And that there are always going to be events that happen. Good events, bad events. And these things are going to be cyclical. And it's going to happen over and over in history. And we saw that throughout. We've seen it throughout the book. And last week, as we began to look really at the practical aspect about finances and sowing your seed and diversifying. As we got toward the end of that section, I went ahead and did through the chapter, and we spoke about the young man, right, in verse 9. And young ladies that are here, don't think that this doesn't apply to you. Of course it does. But he talks about how as a young person you should rejoice during your childhood. And as a young person you should rejoice during, he says, young manhood. And so we can think about young adulthood here for you ladies as well. And he talks about being able to enjoy things in life. Well, it's interesting to me that as we get to chapter 12 and verse 1, there are some things I want you to notice. And I've been going over in my head how I wanted to do this because inevitably you always get in trouble when you start calling names. Don't get scared. But I think about the young people here, okay? And I'm thinking about you as part of my family. And so I look over here and I see Paris. And I look back here and we've got Laney and Matthew and Garrett, and we've got Sarah Lee, and we've got Stephanie and Lindsay, and we've got Audrey, and we've got Colin now. And we've got more, and I'm sure I missed some of you, but what you need to understand is this, is that what Solomon has to say here, and by the way, I know we got, I'm not letting Ryan off the hook back there just because he's working. And Caitlin, who's watching probably online, David, Michael's brother, Isabella, we've got several of them. And just because I don't mention your name doesn't mean this doesn't apply to you, okay? Nor does it mean I don't love you. The point I'm trying to get across to you is I want to pique your interest. I want your ears to be open to what Solomon has to say in this last chapter. Now, we've got a man who's written this through inspiration who has done it all. He's done more than you have done. He's had more money than you will ever have. He's seen things that you'll never see, hopefully. And he's coming toward the end of his life. Depending on when he wrote the book, he's 60, 70 years old, maybe 80 now? He's older. He's done some things. He's seen some things. We've talked about how he investigated things and he had inspired wisdom, right? God gave him inspired wisdom. And so what I want you to pay attention to is three words he says, a couple different words that he says three different times. He says, remember. Pay attention to that word. And I want you to pay attention to the word before. The word before. The first remember came back in chapter 11 and verse 8 where he says, remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. As he's saying, look, in life, you're going to have days that just aren't that great. And we get to chapter 12, and he says here, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Continuing this from verse 9, I believe. Remember also your Creator in the day of your youth. Listen, young people, when he says remember, he's not talking about just bringing to mind that he is your Creator. He's actually talking about you recognizing that he is the one that made you. You remember back in chapter 11 and verse 5 where we read there that he formed your bones in the womb of your mother? He's your Creator. When you wake up in the morning, do you recognize that someone made you? And it's him. And since he made you, he has the authority and he has the power over you. Now what he's done out of his great love for you and kindness for you is he said you can choose if you want to remember me or not. But as we'll see at the end of the book, and as we saw at the end of chapter 11 verse 9, remember he's going to bring whatever decision you make into judgment. Do you recognize that he made you? Do you also recognize this? Since he made you, he knows you. We often say to people, sometimes even when we're married, right? 10, 20, 30 years, whatever it may be, 50, sometimes I don't know who you are. Right? Guess what? God never says that about you. He always knows who you are. He always knows what your heart is. He always knows what you're thinking. When you wake up in the morning with a plan for the day, or as you go throughout the day, do you remember that? Hey, God's watching. He knows. He cares, but he knows what I'm thinking. And so not only has he made you, not only does he know you, but he also has plans for you. When you get to the end of this chapter, you find out that when death comes, you're going to go where? The spirit returns to who? God who made it. Do we remember that each day? Young people, listen. Remember that. Remember him when you're young. Now, we'll get to some more information about that here shortly. But as he continues on, here's the word that he says. We see remember, and he says do it in the days of your youth before. Now, one thing I want you to understand about the word remember is in the original language, this is imperative, okay? Solomon's issuing this command. Do it. And you need to do it when you're young before something's going to happen. What's going to happen? Before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no light in them. Before the sun and light, the moon and the stars are darkened and clouds return after the rain. Do you see what he's saying to you? He's saying when you're young, you need to remember your Creator, because there's going to come a time, guaranteed, okay, before there's going to come a time that things are going to change. And while you're young, you need to recognize these things. And so many of us, would we not shake our head in agreement? I'm not as old as some of y'all, a lot of y'all. But I am older then a lot of the young kids are just called out their names. How many of us would shake our head in agreement and say, I wish I would have done what he said in 12:1 when I was young? Why didn't I listen when those youth groups were together and a preacher was preaching and this was a favorite text? Why didn't I listen? Why didn't I pay attention? Oh, the grief and the pain. Not only did I cause myself, but my parents and my friends and my siblings, and most importantly, my Creator. Why didn't I listen? So listen. Don't be like dummies that went before you. Remember, before the evil days come, and the time is going to come where you say, I just don't enjoy living much anymore. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and clouds return after the rain, isn't that so much different than what you saw back in 11 and verse 7? Oh, it's pleasant and it's good for the eyes to see the sun, he says. But the days are going to come where the storm's going to roll in. And the clouds are going to roll in. And it's not going to look so bright in life anymore. Now, he moves into some language where he uses some language that doesn't make much sense to us. But he's using a metaphor, okay? Now listen what's going to happen. You're young now, but this is what's going to happen. And fortunately for us, you've got some examples of this spread out across this auditorium today. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dim, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. What in the world? Let's see the language that he's using here, again, metaphorically. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. What or who is that? These are hands and arms here. These are hands that used to work. They're strong. Used to tan my kids' hiney with it, right? Used to go out and fix everything. I used to work with these and provide for my family with these. But now, as an old man, hold them out and see. Ask some of our older gentlemen here if they will. Hold your hand out and watch it shake. It trembles now. They want it to be that way? Man, no. I'm remembering when I was a young man. But now those are failing you. And not only are they failing you, and mighty men stoop. Let me ask you, you see anyone walk in this auditorium with a cane? A walker? Yeah. Why? Because those legs that were so strong and could move you about so well, they're starting to fail. They don't have any strength in them anymore. And all of a sudden when I'm walking, I just fall to the ground because I got nothing there anymore. Not only the legs failing, oh, here's one that you might understand. The grinding ones stand idle because they are few. His teeth are falling out. Yeah, that's what he's saying. And he didn't live in the day and age where you could book down to the border and go get you some implants put in. He's got holes all in his head, and he can't sit there and eat any longer. What else happens? And those who look through windows grow dim. He can't see anymore. You ask some of our brethren here who are up in years. I see Miss Rosalie shaking her head back there. Ask her about her eyesight. See my good friend down here, Miss Peggy, and ask her how many times a year she has to go get shots in her eyeball so she can see. You're not going to stop it. It's going to keep coming. And he goes on and he says this, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. In other words, your ears ain't working anymore. How many times have I spoken to some of y'all that said, I'm sorry I didn't hear the sermon today. I left my hearing aids at home. I can't hear. It's coming. You saw the word before. It's coming. Count on it. And one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of the song will sing softly. It's really ironic and quite, I would say, I don't know what the word is. We'll just stick with ironic. It's ironic that as you get older, you can't hear, but you also have a harder time going to sleep. And so you lay in the bed and you sleep so light that he says the sound of a bird tweeting is going to wake you up. You're just not going to rest well anymore. The grinding mill. Didn't mention that. But with a guy who has, or a person who has no teeth and holes in his head, he's not going to hear the crunching of hard bread anymore, is he? No, he's eating oatmeal and cream of wheat and everything soft. You just can't do that. I remember watching my dad as he got older, bacon out the door, all this kind of good stuff out the door, and I'm thinking, my day's coming. And that's what Solomon's saying here. And all the daughters of song will sing softly. Got a weak voice, you know. Can't belt it out. It's not strong anymore. Okay? So he's given this picture of growing old. Growing old. And he makes it very clear. You are going to grow old. All things, you know, without any tragedy, which we can't count on. But if you make it, right, to be an old person, it's going to get tough. You've heard people say it before. Getting old ain't for the weak. It ain't. I look at so many of you and I stand in awe and admiration of your determination and desire to keep going, to be here. I know it was no small task to get up, put the WD-40 in all the joints, make them work, to get in the car and come to worship and sit in these horribly uncomfortable pews. That's what's going to happen, though, isn't it? To all these young people, it's what's going to happen. We're going that direction. What happens after we get old? Well, Solomon escalates and he takes us to the next step. And he says here, furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper drags himself along and the caperberry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. What do you mean men are afraid of a high place? Let me ask you, how many people you know, men and women, that were too old to get up on a ladder, right? Yeah. And here's what happens. I still have firm footing, okay? I get on a ladder and I'm just fine. But I have gotten on a ladder several times in these later years of my life where I forget that I'm on a ladder. Yeah. You don't want to do that when you're 10 feet off the ground. But here's the thing. The old man recognizes, I'm not steady. I'm afraid to get on that ladder. Because if I fall and break a hip, you know, that's sort of cliche, isn't it? We say you break a hip, that's the beginning of the end, right? But those types of things is what he's saying. And instead of getting out and going around like he did before, he's afraid of terrors on the road. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here at home where I know, where I'm certain it's safe. I'm not going anywhere. He mentioned this grasshopper or the almond tree blossoms. You ever seen an almond tree blossom? He's talking about white hair. Your hair gets white if you get to keep it, okay? That's what he's referring to. The grasshopper drags himself along, a grasshopper who is hopping around, and you know how grasshoppers go from place to place. That grasshopper's not doing that anymore. He's sort of just dragging himself down the road, and the caperberry is ineffective. Boy, that's one lost on us. And I've read it a couple ways, but I think the conclusion is the same. Some have said it's an aphrodisiac. Some have said it's to help increase that they would eat caperberry and it would increase your appetite for food. We'll say it this way, that your appetite for intimacy or food, it just ain't there. No more. And after all this happens, then what happens? Well, man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. The professional mourners are there. You die, and they're going to go and mourn in the street. And he says it a different way, verse 6. Pay attention. Remember. See the word? Remember him before. Before the silver cord is broken, the golden bowl is crushed, the pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. He's giving the imperative again. Make sure you remember before these things happen. They're going to happen. You notice how he says broken or crushed 3 different times? What's the silver cord in the golden bowl? The idea here, at least the best I can understand, is this is something hung from the roof where the golden bowl would be a lamp, or it would be light in the house. And the silver cord that holds it up, it's a metaphor again for life. The cord's worn out. It falls and the oil lamp busts on the ground. Life's over. That's the point. Life is over. And the pitcher by the well is shattered. The wheel at the cistern is crushed. You know what a well looks like. How you got the pitcher or the bucket and you pull it up on a pulley. Well, the fact of the matter is that wheel don't work anymore. The bucket's hit the ground and it's shattered in the bottom. Life has come to an end. Remember your Creator before that happens. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. When you're living life and you're going 90 miles an hour, and then eventually you're going to slow down to about 10, and then it's going to come to a halt. Any pursuit that you had, anything other than remembering your Creator, you've wasted your life. You've wasted it. And you don't get another one. There's no second chances. So he's taken us from being young to getting old to death. And you say, oh, preacher, what an encouraging sermon. Listen, if you're thinking about the fact that this may be a real downer, or I don't have anything to look forward to, that life is only going to get worse, then you're missing the point of the book. And you're missing the point of our last 12 whatever weeks together in the book. Remember how many times Solomon said, look, be happy in life. Be happy. Rejoice. You're allowed to sit down and enjoy a good meal. You're allowed to sit there with your friends and laugh and look at the things that God gave you and say, thank you, God Almighty, for blessing me with all this. But you got to remember it in the context in which he says it. You can do all those things, but you do it in the context of trusting and remembering God. He's the one that gave it all to you. And we live in a world that says, if you choose to follow God, you're not going to have a good life. If you choose to follow Christ, it's going to be real boring for you. All the don'ts and don'ts and don'ts. Look, there's a whole lot of do's and a lot of smiles. But that's not what the book says. The book says, I gave you all this stuff. Remember where it came from. And while you're young especially, before you start getting old. Because the time's going to come, you just don't get to do it anymore. Look what we read here. Verse 10. Oh no, let's read verse 9. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge. And he pondered, searched, and arranged many proverbs. Listen to this. If you think that the book is a downer, like so many commentators do, listen to the end. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. He says the words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails, and they are given by one shepherd. What's he saying here? A goad is something, of course, that you would poke at the bottom of a sheep to make sure they're going in the right direction. And a well-driven nail is one that's placed exactly perfectly. These are words that come from one shepherd. This is God Almighty. Okay? And Solomon wrote these down. Listen to him. They're going to hit the mark. They hit the target. And the whole point of it is to bring about truth and delight in God. Well, he says, beyond this, my son, be warned. Pay attention, young folks. Beyond this, my son. And I wonder sometimes, when we have Rehoboam being his son, I wonder if this is the son he's speaking of, or some other. But Rehoboam didn't listen, did he? My son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. And I almost picture it like Solomon saying, look, I've given you all this wisdom. I've told you how to live. I told you the best way to get the most out of this life, to have a great and fulfilled and wonderful life here, and in the next life to have it. But what you're going to do is you're going to look and say, just like so many do, maybe I'm going to look somewhere else because I don't necessarily think that's the only answer. And you're going to go through all these books and you're going to look everywhere you can to try to find the answer to life. And you're going to be weary at the end and you're going to come full circle. And he says this, the conclusion, when all has been heard, when it's all said and done, you boil it all down. This is the whole Bible right here in these two verses. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. That's where it lands. All that wisdom down to just a few words, and yet so profound, and will change your life forever. Literally into eternity. Where are you today? Young folks, when you rise in the morning, do you remember your Creator? Do you remember that he made you? Do you talk to him in prayer? I hope that you do. And I hope that you'll take this lesson to heart. Now, we've emphasized young, right? But how could this message not hit everybody? And it should hit everybody. Verse 13, because this applies to whom? Doesn't just say young people. This applies to every person. Look, you and I are one day going to fulfill this verse 14. God's going to bring every act to judgment. Everything that's hidden, whether it's good or whether it's evil. So whether you're knocking on 100 or you're just a teenager, eventually verse 14 is going to happen. What are you going to say? I listened? I did my best for the Lord? Or, I did like Billy Joel in the song, right? I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. What a stinking view. I hope that every single one of us will keep in mind our Creator and face each day trusting him. The world's not going to change. Never going to change. Always going to be bad in it. You're never going to see the justice we should see. What you can do is do like Solomon said, trust him. In everything, trust him. Remember him before those days happen. I hope if you need to respond to the invitation today, you need to change your life today, don't wait. If you need to respond, won't you come? Why? Roger leads us in the closing song. Won't you stand while we sing?